Hello, my name is Nick Scoulon. I'm a counselor with One Stop Student Services at the University of Minnesota Morris. Today, I'm going to talk to you about college costs, financial aid, and the free application for federal student aid, also referred to as the FAFSA. As part of your college search, you should be researching what it costs to go to any college or university you're interested in. Cost information should be provided on college websites, and it should be provided by the admissions office. Ask lots of questions when you are provided with cost information, so you know exactly what costs are represented in the figures that you're given. And be aware that you may get different figures at different times in the admission process. For example, at the beginning, you may only get direct costs, things like tuition, fees, room, and a meal plan. Eventually, you'll probably be presented with the cost of attendance. This also includes assumed indirect costs as a representation of the total expected cost of attending a particular institution. So in addition to all of those direct costs, you'll also have things like personal and miscellaneous expenses, assumed costs for books, and transportation to and from campus that are built into an additional figure in the cost of attendance. Be aware that that is not what you'll actually pay to attend that particular institution because those assumed costs are also built in. Eventually, you'll probably also see a net price as part of the process. The net price takes that cost of attendance, both the direct costs and assumed costs, and subtracts any financial aid that you're eligible for at that institution. Net cost is a much better representation of what you'll actually pay at a particular college or university because it's including the financial aid piece, meaning that the net cost should be approximately what you would be expected to pay in addition to any financial aid you would receive. After you start looking at the costs of attending the colleges and universities you're interested in, you should start asking yourself the question, how am I going to pay for this? And there are many resources you may potentially call upon to do just that. Financial aid makes up a big portion of a lot of students' resources to help pay for college. You might also be looking at savings, whether or not you've saved money to help pay for college or family members have saved for you. You might be working while you're in school or have worked before you started college and saved up money to meet some of your expenses. And you may potentially have support from your family to help pay your bill as you go along. We're here today, though, to talk specifically about one resource, financial aid. So I want to start with a definition of financial aid. Basic, simple, just so you know where we're going from. Financial aid are funds that are provided to students and families to help pay for post-secondary educational expenses. In other words, this is money provided to you to help you pay for college. Broadly speaking, there are two types of financial aid, gift aid and self-help aid. Gift aid is money that does not have to be paid back or worked for. This includes scholarships and grants. Scholarships are typically awarded by colleges and universities, as well as organizations outside of those educational institutions, companies, employers, and others. You often have to apply for scholarships to be considered for them, and they're typically awarded on the basis of merit, skill, or unique characteristic, meaning things like academic performance and grades, your participation in sports, music, or other extracurricular activities, or any unique characteristic such as cultural or ethnic background, your geographic region where you grew up, or your intended area of study. Grants, on the other hand, are more often need-based and are typically coming from federal and state governments. So things like the FAFSA are how you apply for those grants. Occasionally, grants do come from other sources. In those instances, they'd be more like a scholarship where you would have to actively apply in order to be considered. Self-help aid, on the other hand, are loans and work study and student employment. Loans is money that is borrowed by students and or parents to help pay their educational expenses. So this is money that you will borrow and then pay back with interest at some time in the future. Student loans are available from federal and state governments, as well as from private lenders such as banks and credit unions. Repayment on student loans typically begins after a student's education is completed, but that is not always a guarantee. So it's important to keep in mind what the fine print is to know when you are supposed to start repaying those loans and how much you're expected to pay. Since you are borrowing money and do have to pay it back someday with interest, borrow only what you need in student loans to meet your expenses. Work study allows you to work while you are in school. Oftentimes, this is in conjunction with federal or state work study programs that are financial aid that is given to students. These are pools of money that students can earn through working on campus. The program allows students to work to help pay their expenses, and through that program, students typically get to choose whether they want to work or not, and how much they want to work. Payment comes in two forms, typically, either a paycheck, just like a regular job, or occasionally you might get non-monetary compensation from a college or university, such as having your room and meal plan covered for doing something like being a resident assistant in a residence hall. Before we start talking about the FAFSA proper, I want to start by mentioning the FSA ID. This is a username and password that you use to complete the FAFSA. It can be used as your electronic signature when you get to the end of the FAFSA, and both students and parents can create an FSA ID. It's good to note that only the owner of an FSA ID should create their own FSA ID. This means parents, please let your students make their own and maintain it on their own. This can be used for different aspects of the financial aid process. Completing the FAFSA is a big one, but it's also used by students to access their financial aid information later on in their education. It will be used in subsequent years to complete FAFSAs for additional years, so make sure that you keep track of that username and password. And when you set it up, be sure to set up recovery email addresses and phone numbers so in the event you forget either the username or the password, it's a pretty simple process to get it back. Don't use potentially temporary email addresses when you're setting up an FSA ID. So students, don't use your high school email address if you're going to lose access to it shortly after graduating. And parents or students, if you have an employer-sponsored email address, I would recommend not using those just in case you change employment. You can apply for an FSA ID at fsaid.ed.gov. And now on to the FAFSA. This is the free application for federal student aid. I want to emphasize that it is free. You do not need to pay somebody to complete the FAFSA for you. Such services do exist, and if you want to pay that price of convenience, that is up to you. However, I would caution you on the service that you choose. Many of these services can be disingenuous in the promises that they make or the fees that they charge, and sometimes they can be outright scams. I would instead just recommend that you complete the FAFSA on your own. It is available in 2 languages currently, English and in Spanish, and it's collecting demographic and financial information about the student, and if it's determined necessary by their parent or parents, to determine the expected family contribution. It's important to note that despite that scary name, expected family contribution is not actually the amount of money that is expected for the family to contribute to a student's education. This is simply a name for the number that the FAFSA generates, and that number is used by colleges and universities to determine a student's eligibility for federal and state financial aid programs. The FAFSA uses tax and income information from 2 years ago. This means that if you're going to be starting college in the fall of 2022, your FAFSA for that year would be using tax and income information from 2020. Then in 2023, you'd be using tax and income information from 2021, so on and so forth. The FAFSA is available on October 1st of each year, and most colleges and universities have FAFSA filing deadlines, so it's good to be aware of what those deadlines are. A lot of times there are financial aid programs riding on the line, so you want to make sure that you get the FAFSA done by the deadline for any college or university you're considering. The FAFSA has many handy features, including skip logic and answers to common questions. Skip logic allows you to skip questions that you don't need to answer based on your answers to previous questions. And there are help icons to help answer some of the questions you might have about what the FAFSA is asking you. You have the option to save your progress and return at a later time, so there's no obligation to complete the FAFSA all in one go. You also have the option to use the IRS data retrieval tool to import tax information directly from the IRS database into the FAFSA. Once you complete your FAFSA, you'll have the ability to check its status online. The FAFSA is going to determine the dependency status of the student completing it. It's important to note that this is different from dependency as determined when you're completing your taxes. There are a series of questions that the FAFSA will ask the student to answer, and depending upon the answers to those questions, the FAFSA itself will determine if the student is dependent, meaning that they need to provide parent information, or if they are independent, meaning that they only need to provide their own information. For the dependency questions, if a student selects no to all of them, they will be considered dependent. If they select yes to any one, they are usually going to be considered independent. Though depending upon the question that you answer, there might be some follow-up by the colleges and universities you send your FAFSA to. Just be aware of that. For a little bit more on the IRS data retrieval tool, again, it imports tax information from the IRS database directly into the FAFSA. It's not required that you use the IRS data retrieval tool, but it's very helpful. It saves you a lot of manual entry and the potential for errors. The information that's coming from the IRS into the FAFSA is encrypted, and it's also obscured, so you will only see transferred from the IRS in places where information from the IRS has been imported. So you know that information is secure. Not everyone is going to be eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Just be aware of that. But for those of you that are eligible, I highly, highly recommend using it. There are a number of errors that are commonly made by students when they're completing their FAFSAs. I want you to be aware of them in the hopes that you might avoid these errors as you complete your own FAFSA. Social Security numbers can potentially be miskeyed or typed in for the wrong individual. So make sure that you're paying attention to Social Security numbers, ensure that all of the digits are correct, and that those digits match up with the name that you're putting them in for. Parent information and parent income information can also be tricky to navigate, particularly in the instance of separation or divorce, where it may not be clear who should be reported on a student's FAFSA. Untaxed income is another one that has the potential to cause confusion, and household size and number in college also get tricky depending upon how many students are in college, if there are siblings that may be living in the home but aren't in college themselves or not in college full-time. These are things to be aware of and good questions to ask of financial aid professionals, guidance counselors who might be able to help you out. Real estate and investment net worth also can trip people up. You don't have to report the home in which you live, but if you have other property, there is the potential you may have to report it. And you might have to figure out if you have investments, if they're considered retirement and wouldn't need to be included on FAFSA, or if they do need to be included as part of the assets that are reported. Just be aware, there might be some confusion. Ask lots of questions. There are people there who can help you navigate these and make sure that you're reporting the correct information. You've completed your FAFSA. So now what? Well, the information is going to be sent to colleges and universities, up to 10 that you provide on the FAFSA. It typically takes about 2 weeks for that information to go from the federal government to the colleges and universities that you've indicated. So if you don't hear anything about your FAFSA right away, don't worry about it. It's just a matter of letting those gears turn. Some schools might also not do anything with your FAFSA information until you're actually admitted to that college or university and could potentially be an incoming student. Again, that's an instance where don't worry about it if you don't hear back right away. You might get contacted by colleges and universities if they're requesting additional information. There is the potential that they need to follow up on something that you've reported on the FAFSA. So just be aware if you get those requests to complete them as soon as possible so you can get your financial aid information. You'll get a student aid report from the federal government once your FAFSA has been processed by the federal government and then subsequently sent to those colleges and universities you indicated. If you listed an email address, the student aid report will get sent to that email address. Otherwise, you would receive the student aid report by mail to the address you listed on FAFSA. This is going to include a summary of all of your responses to the questions, and it will give you some information about what kinds of federal financial aid you would be estimated to be eligible for at colleges and universities. If after you've completed the FAFSA, you realize you need to make a correction to some of the information you provided, you do have the opportunity to do that. You can log back in either online or if you completed the FAFSA on the mobile app, on your mobile app, go in and make those corrections and resubmit. Or you may be able to make corrections through the financial aid office if you're already down to 1 or 2 top choices for colleges or universities. Early on in the process, I would recommend just going in and making the corrections on your own. But like I said, if you're already down to just 1 or 2 choices, it might be easier just to go through the financial aid office to make corrections. The FAFSA is somewhat general, so it can't encompass every possible scenario or financial circumstance. If you feel like the FAFSA doesn't adequately represent your or your family's current financial situation, you may want to look into the possibility of documenting special circumstances. These would usually be circumstances that significantly changed your financial situation from what it looked like 2 years ago. Some of these situations might include unusual or uncovered medical or dental expenses, a death in the family, perhaps divorce or separation of parents, or a loss of employment for one or more family members for an extended period of time. If any of these apply to you, or if you have other unique situations you don't feel are adequately represented by the information FAFSA asks for, talk to the financial aid office at your top choice colleges and universities. Oftentimes, they do have processes that can account for many of these situations. Do expect that there's going to be paperwork and that you'll have to provide some documentation showing how your situation has changed from 2 years ago to today. And be aware that decisions are made on a school-by-school basis and they are final. There is no opportunity to appeal to the Department of Education at the federal level. Each school has its own autonomy in making those choices about special circumstances. So what they say is the result is what it's going to be for that school. And now we have come to the end of the presentation. This is a collection of different resources that you can potentially call upon for information as you go through the FAFSA process and through the process of searching for colleges and universities, looking at that financial piece. onestop.morris.umn.edu is the one-stop website for the University of Minnesota Morris. There's lots of good information out there, but it is rather specific to the University of Minnesota system and to the Morris campus even more specifically. So just be aware that it may or may not be as useful as you'd like. There are other more general resources in this list, though, that you'd be able to look at. NASFA.org is the website for the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. It is a very good resource. It focuses primarily on federal financial aid programs. ohe.state.minnesota.us. That is the Minnesota Department of Higher Education's website. And it has information specifically about Minnesota state financial aid programs. Studentaid.gov. This is where you can go to complete your FAFSA and to get information about various federal financial aid programs. FSAID.ed.gov to apply for your FSA ID prior to completing your FAFSA, and collegecosts.ed.gov, which is a good tool for estimating how much it would cost to go to a particular college or university. If you would like some live assistance, you can contact the University of Minnesota Morris One Stop. As a community outreach program, we are available to help you with FAFSA questions and financial aid questions, even if you're not interested in the University of Minnesota Morris. So please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd be happy to help you. And with that, I bid you farewell. I hope this video has been very helpful and informative to you. And once again, if you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to the University of Minnesota Morris One Stop. Thanks and take care.